Welcome to an R & Company conversation. Today, we are thrilled to be hosting Joyce Lin, who is Zooming from her woodworking shop in Houston, and Rosanne Somerson from her home in Westport, Massachusetts. My name is James Zemaitis, and I'm the Director of Museum Relations at R & Company, and I am coming to you live from our 64 White Street headquarters in New York, which is the site of Joyce Lin's first solo exhibition at the gallery. As a reminder, if you have questions for Rosanne and Joyce during their conversation, please leave them in the Q&A section, not the chat section, where I will be reviewing them. In a day or two, this conversation will be posted on our gallery's YouTube channel, where you can find recordings of all of our past chats. Entitled Material Autopsy, Joyce Lin's exhibition is a celebration of her cerebral yet playful experimentations with materials, how she really explores the liminal areas between natural and artificial in her furniture making practice. The show also serves as a survey of Joyce's young career, starting with, and Michael, if you could, next slide, starting with the exploded chair, which is on your left there, originally designed in 2017, during her final year at RISD, and which our gallery first featured, as shown here, in 2019 in an exhibition called Chairs Beyond Right and Wrong, curated by Raquel Kerr. And on the right, our exhibition goes up through her most recent work, such as the wood chair here, which has been the subject of significant acclaim and really a sense of awestruck wonder at its execution from collectors and curators who have come and seen it in person. Next slide, please. On our gallery's archival floor, we are exhibiting Joyce's original drawings of her designs. And here, once again, you see the exploded chair on the left and the wood chair on the right. And these drawings, as well as beautifully written entries by Joyce herself, are collected in her process journal, which I'm showing right here, which was published in conjunction with the show. We are awaiting delivery of the second printing. And if you cannot see the show in person and would like a copy, mention it in the Q&A or the chat, and we will contact you via your email to get your postal address. The exhibition runs through early August, so plenty of time to come here to the city and see it. Raised in Alabama, Joyce received her bachelor's degrees in furniture design and geology from RISD and Brown, and she was the recipient of the Samuel Gregg Award for Innovation and Excellence in Craft, named after the early 19th century Boston-based designer of the seminal elastic chair, which is my favorite bentwood chair of all time, and of which there is an excellent video available online narrated by Rosanne. Next slide, please. And one of the pioneering woodworkers of the American studio furniture movement, Rosanne Somerson received her BFA in industrial design at RISD in 1976, which was the undergrad program at the time where there was woodworking on offer. Her mentor was the Danish-American woodworker Tage Frid, and I am showing on the right here a photo that I recently took at the Milwaukee Art Museum in their Scandinavian Design and America exhibition, which shows Frid's classic three-legged stool in the foreground there, with a table made by Rosanne just recently in 2019, known as the ribbon table in cherry, aluminum, and digitally printed maple, which is both an homage to Fried's interest in wood, laminated aluminum, as well as to the rattan caning seen in some of Hans Wegner's chairs and stools, for example. And on the left is a photo from the current exhibition on women designers at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, featuring a tall back chair of Rosanne's from 1990, which is now in the collection of RISD's museum. It's in poplin and holly and bronze, and has always struck me as a bit as being a Macintosh-inspired kindred spirit of sorts to fellow RISD alums Wendy Maruyama's Mickey Macintosh chair from that era. Really, I'm quite in awe of having Rosanne join us today, and I will conclude my introduction by stating that Rosanne has dedicated much of her life to service at RISD, culminating in her 6-year term as RISD's 17th president from 2015 to 2021. So welcome to the two of you here. And I think maybe we should kick this off with some discussions about RISD's program and really where it all comes for you, Rosanne, in terms of your history of mentoring there and when and where you first met Joyce.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for including me. And Joyce, I just want to say your show is amazing. I just really loved seeing it and reading what you wrote and seeing your drawings. And, you know, since the first piece I saw of yours at RISD, I've been in awe of you and the way you think in your work. So congratulations. It's truly a wonderful exhibit. And I would just say that for me, well, maybe I can just mention that when I was at RISD, I did a lot of things. I had a lot of roles, but I was a key figure in starting the furniture design department. And I always imagined what the student of the future would be, because I didn't have that opportunity when I was a student, and it was very difficult. And then when I was in an administrative role prior to being president, I decided to really push the RISD Brown dual degree through. So I was the RISD person that actually made that happen from the RISD side. And then I also, as a department head, created the Samuel Gregg Award. So looking at you and seeing all these amazing achievements, and, you know, I couldn't have dreamed when I was doing that work that there would be someone like you who took advantage of all of those things so well. And so it's really meaningful, you know, on that level, as well as just really being in awe of what you do. But I think when we did the RISD Brown dual degree program, the reason we did it was we felt that there were certain minds, certain creative minds, that could only learn in the most opportune way by combining different disciplines. And when I look at what you did as a furniture designer and as someone majoring in geology, and think about how that, I don't know how that affects your geological studies, but I know how it affects your furniture, and seeing how you have this kind of inner core in everything that you do that's really about, you know, on a kind of hypothetical level, the essence of things, and on a physical level, the structure and the materiality of things. That combination, I think, came out of your joint study, and it's just an amazing thing to see. So maybe we could start off by you talking about that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, it's such, like, really, it's such an honor to be doing this talk with you, because I mean, you know, by the time I was a student, you know, you were already provost, then you were president. So, you know, my interactions with you were really kind of indirect, you know, just feeling, you know, experiencing the legacy that you had, you know, already set up in this environment that you had created. And yeah, like what you said is completely true, that I think, you know, who I am now as a maker is really like a product of that sort of ambiguous environment that you had created, that I thought was really the reason why I was drawn to furniture design department in the first place. You know, I went to a fine arts high school, so I had already had this pretty rigorous conceptual fine art education. And I just felt like, you know, there was just something missing for me. You know, we weren't really, we were learning, you know, kind of our own personal expression, but not really about like, a tradition of craft and like how to make things in this really, you know, thoughtful and like rigorous way. Although it was that, but, you know, not with the, you know, woodworking and these like, you know, tools and equipment. But I was really drawn to the furniture design department because it was just like nothing I'd ever seen before. I thought like these people, like they get it, you know. And I had, around that time, that was also when you the art of critical making, you know, had come out, and you know, John Dunnigan was talking about thinking, like thing king. I thought that was like a little bit corny, but like, so yes, you know, it's really about, you know, thinking through making. And I just think that, you know, as you've said before, like the, you know, innovation comes from the intersection of different fields and different areas. And you know, I just think that you know, a place like the furniture department that is on this, where you can be anywhere on the spectrum between art and craft and design, and it's not even really something that you have to think too hard about, is just, it has I think a really long-standing future, and because, you know, future generations can really like make it what they want it, you know, want it to be.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that the department enabled is this creating this certain environment that you talk about. When was trying desperately to learn how to make things out of wood as an industrial design major, and I had the opportunity to work with Tay Frid. There was a sense that Tay was very practical, and he wanted us to all be able to make a living out of our work. And, you know, his famous quote, "Baby, it's cold outside," meaning that, you know, you have to make money to survive. And we were sort of working toward a particular tradition, which you know, was Scandinavian modernism at that point, and a sense of craft and really understanding wood as a material and ergonomics and proper construction methods and finishing methods, et cetera. But when, as we evolved, and I think this has a lot to do in part with when women came into the field, because they didn't have necessarily the background skills. I mean, I tried to take shop in middle school and was almost suspended for being, you know, a rabble rouser. But many women didn't have the opportunity to really grow up with tools. And so when we came into it, we brought all the things that made us who we were. And so we brought in different sensibilities. And I think that the faculty in general in the furniture department shared that sentiment about being a place for experimentation, not for imitation of the professor's ways of working. And from my perspective, I always felt like teaching was about creating a learning environment, not, you know, imparting knowledge in one direction, but I learned as much from the students as hopefully they learned from me and from my colleagues. And it was about creating this really creative environment where experimentation was the expectation, and the whole notion of what succeeds and what fails was completely out of the main area of focus. It was really about perseverance and about pursuing a path that brought in exactly what each student's unique way of thinking was. And so when you came in with your unique way of thinking, you know, I didn't directly teach you. I think you worked much more with John and Lothar and other faculty, but I certainly attended your critiques. And you know, early on in my sketchbook, I actually had a drawing of a chair encased in plexiglass, which I never made. And I was just thinking about the chair as a container of the body. And then what if you made a container out of the chair? So when I saw your exploded chair, it was like, who made this? I saw it at Brown, actually, in the RISD Brown dual degree exhibition. And when I saw that it was you, I immediately, you know, wanted to learn about you, because I felt like it was such a better rendition of this concept than the one in my sketchbook, for one thing. But it was also just so intriguing to see how you had thought about it as this exploded chair in space, essentially capturing that. And so I, you know, followed your work from then on, and continue to be just so amazed by the way that how you think shows up in your objects in a way that no one else is doing. It's really your terrain and your lane, and I love that about, and it's done so well. So I love that about your work.
Yeah, I thought the department is really interesting to me because it does give, it's a little bit of both, where you have like the area of experimentation, but then you have like such a rigorous, you know, craft tradition, you know, learning in sophomore years, you know, doing everything by hand. And, you know, also the way the assignments are laid out feel pretty rigid at first. You know, there's like the bench assignment, the box assignment, table assignment. But I think for me, because I was a little bit resistant to the idea of being a designer for I think a long time, actually, you know, joined the department, but it offered kind of just the right bit of pushback for me. So that, you know, when I feel what I really appreciated about the department was that when a student felt, you know, ready to really push the bounds, the teachers would be like, you know, can you achieve this? And then you just trust them to do it. But it's still all about, you know, having like this finished product in the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's something about the finished project that shows a kind of commitment, and it's also an outcome of the thinking. So it's a good way to gauge if the thinking was clear enough, and if that shows, you know, through the making. And so the critiques were, you know, a huge part of the process, and I think hopefully very constructive in general. I think the environment was such that people were very generous about providing their ideas for the what ifs, or the have you seen, or the do you know, or this to me reminds me of that. And so it was a very immersive experience in the critiques, which I think was a huge part of the learning. And if you don't have that object, whether or not it's wholly realized, but at least it's a commitment. You've made a commitment to a thing in space there in front of everyone, that you can't get away with certain kinds. It involves a certain kind of commitment to an idea that is really important in developing work. And we used to say that the most important object, was not necessarily the thing that someone made, but the student themselves and their ability to make anything, to express their ideas in any way, even in really new terrain, or incorporating hand skills and digital skills, or it didn't matter what the particular aspect of the language was. It was just having the ability to use those different languages as tools to get at an idea and to bring it to life. And I think in a way, I wish that children in like early ed could have that kind of experience. I think that they be so much more adept at problem solving if they had some of that at a very early age. And so for a lot of people coming into the program, they almost had to undo their education prior to that and really kind of open their mind to thinking about learning in a different way, and in such a personal way, which even if they're designing for the public or for something in mass production, if it expresses something that is true, internally, it's probably going to have resonance with other people. And so it's that sense of kind of humanity or something that is inherent in the kind of work that I think gets produced, whether it's on a personal level or on a mass production level.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of curious. Like I feel like as the years go by, I feel like there's kind of this loosening, or like almost like a distortion of like these rules of making, where people are really trying to push the bounds more and more, especially with more like digital technology, more CNC routing in the curriculum. I'm just kind of curious, like what do you think about like the role of these craft traditions in future generations of makers?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a complicated question, because there's only, if you're talking about in a curriculum, there's only so much time that you have in the program. But I do believe that if you know how to make things, if you have this sensibility and can make things by hand first, or have a really deep understanding of materials, that gives you a big leg up when you start to work digitally or virtually or with computational tools, because you bring a kind of awareness to that process that you wouldn't bring otherwise. And I remember when students were first using CNC stuff, they were actually setting the tool paths wrong and changing the resolution oddly, so that these mistakes would happen, but in a very beautiful way. And they were able to make things on CNC routers that looked totally handmade and that were actually could be duplicated in that. So it's that sort of ingenuity with understanding what a process can be and then applying that. And the tool is the tool. I think that if Chippendale had the tools that we all have access to, their studio would have been using them too. It's just this sense of what are the opportunities to get an idea out, and what are the best ways to do that. But there's more and more to learn. And, I think one of the big differences now is that it has to do with how work is seen even more than how it's made. And the sense of like what we're doing now, right? This kind of online audience for work. And it's going to be interesting to see how that affects how work is collected and lived with, in a sense, because a lot of people have this kind of alternative world online, and that they curate very carefully. And what are the objects in those alternative worlds? And do those need different principles to evolve? I don't know yet, but these are all interesting questions, I think.
Yeah, I think about this a lot, really. I mean, it's kind of like, like you say, it's like, you think through making, and the way that we make them, our modes of making, even, especially like with all these craft traditions, it really is like a philosophy of like how you live, how you live through life. So I think the reason why I keep remaking the same chair, but with these different processes, I barely even do woodworking joinery anymore. I fake it, it's something that's, made for a box, an acrylic container. But, I think that thinking, that philosophy is why I keep, reinventing the way that I make things. And because I want to make something that really expresses like how I feel right now, and this new world that is just so strange and uncertain.
Can I jump in at this point? I was thinking about this question. I'm not sure.
Is there background noise going on?
Yeah, I'm not sure where that feedback is coming from. My
No,
apologies.
I think it's from something going on in my background. I'm going to mute when I'm not speaking.
Okay. This question is sort of two-part, but it's going to begin with Rosanne. Gender, woodworking, furniture making, gender. I was just, while you were discussing the last back and forth, I was thinking about this because I was reminded of the fact that both of you are featured right now in this show in Montreal, which is an encyclopedic survey of women designers in North America. And Rosanne, I think the first time I ever encountered your work or read about your work was a little over 20 years ago in a previous encyclopedic survey on women designers, the one that took place at the Bard Graduate Center, Women Designers in the USA. And in that particular exhibition, you had an earrings cabinet that is in the collection of Yale. And a couple of days ago, I was rereading Professor Ned Cook's entry on women's woodworking for that exhibition catalog. And he talks about, of course, the gendering of certain furniture pieces, and how he makes this sort of statement that women woodworking is important because it allows us to look at forms that women woodworkers make much more than men woodworkers, in a sense, that because they are items of domestic life that are gendered. And I thought it was an interesting statement, because I guess my question for you, and then we can move that into Joyce as part of your conversation here, is when you were making work in the 1980s and creating bodies of work for shows at the time, were you specifically thinking of gender when you were making those pieces? Were you thinking of making pieces for a women's audience that would expand sort of the palette of music stands and sideboards that were being made, and rocking chairs by the famous men woodworkers of that period?
So I would just start by saying that gender is a big topic, because I think we're less and less thinking about gender in terms of binaries, than we did perhaps when I was starting out. But I never, at the time, I was really, I would consider myself, in the 70s when I was starting up, to be a feminist. And I was not thinking at all about the object as a representation of me as a woman, or, I just was thinking about the fact that I would make what I was interested in making, and I had the right to do that. And there weren't very many people doing that. I think that so many women have gone through the furniture department at RISD and been so successful, and other programs too. And there are other, very successful women makers. But at the time, there were a handful of us, and we were not given the seriousness at all that we really should have been. And, I could go on for a long time, which I won't, about like lumberyard experiences, buying materials. And I knew a lot about wood, and these, guys who were trying to sell me wood were very condescending. And it was, and I just had to learn to not take it in, because it wasn't who I was, it was who they were. But I was interested at the time, there were a lot of shows in my early career, Women Are Woodworking, that kind of thing. And I felt like they were they were intended to feature us, but in a way, just the way that they called out the women was a little bit demeaning. I just wanted to be a woodworker. I wanted to be a furniture designer. And I didn't want people to have to put, female into that. As I've gotten older, I don't feel that way anymore, though. I'm really proud of who I am as a woman. And early in my career, I did a lot of pieces about motherhood and things that were very specific to my life as a woman. And I felt more confident about expressing who that was and how that was working in my work. But I didn't think about the objects as being gendered. I just thought about the fact that there were things I wanted to make. I happened to be a woman, and I wanted that freedom and that expression and that seriousness to be, accepted through my work.
So in many ways, then it really was the case of Ned Cook sort of trying to place you within his thesis at the time, in terms of showing the evolution of women as they more and more of you entered the academic establishment and the gallery world at the time.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I have great respect for Ned, and he was an amazing help to me in helping my career to grow. I do think that there probably weren't men at the time making earring cabinets, for example, but I think I didn't approach it that way. Like, I'm going to make an object for women. I just thought, I have earrings. There's no place to store them. I need an earring cabinet. So it was more of a practical thing in my life. I think the pieces about motherhood were much more intentionally about being a woman, because becoming a mother was a huge part of my life and was not an easy process. And so when it finally happened in various ways, I wanted to celebrate that. But, a lot of my, recently I was in another show of women furniture makers, and there were a lot of them, which really made me so happy. And someone came up to me and said, you're the only woman in the show that has children. And that was interesting too. I mean, there are all different ways of being a woman. And so, and they're all, that's fine. So it's not about one perceived notion of being a woman. It just happens to be, my story. But I think good designers and makers tell their own stories, whatever that is. And some of the complexities of identity in this particular moment in time that we're all living through are really wonderful fodder for making and for objects. And that to me is as exciting as anything about, a specific gender approach, I would say.
Joyce, how about you? I mean, you manage a woodworking, I guess the right word might be a cooperative in Houston, the East End maker, what is it called? The East End
Maker Hub.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel any of that? I don't know. Do you feel singled out in that way at all in this day and era? In this where you work and with all of the different people that you work with?
Yeah, I guess I would say, like, I didn't really feel, I guess, my gender until I graduated and had to face the real world and interact with real people. Not that artists aren't real people. But yeah, so I mean, my job at the makerspace called where TXRX Labs is the makerspace within the East End Maker Hub. But I manage the wood shop, so I teach the classes. I also, I develop the curriculums, manage like members, make sure everyone's working safely, emails, that kind of thing. But when I started out, I was completely fresh out of graduation. I barely knew anything. I had to look up everything, how to maintain the equipment and all of that. So for me, it was like my barrier at first was really a self-confidence thing. I wasn't sure how people were going to perceive me being, small, Asian, female, very young. So I just felt like I had a lot of things, like I had to project authority and say like, okay, don't do this, like, clean up after yourself. But at the same time, these were, woodworkers, like a lot of retirees who had been doing this for years in this shop that had not really any rules at the time. So I really forced myself to put my foot down and introduce myself to everyone. But I mean, for me, it's like through just learning and like through feeling like more competent and confidence, especially being an instructor now and having to really project my voice and really show that, people can have confidence in me to put their safety in my hands. That was kind of the biggest barrier. And obviously, I still deal with, the people making like past, these comments at the lumberyard, just whatever. It doesn't, it doesn't really faze me that much, because for me, it's like furniture design has always been just like a means to an end. I don't really see myself as part of this huge tradition of like fine woodworkers, which I like am very inspired by them, but it's not part of my narrative personally.
Yeah, I think that there are so many more opportunities to utilize as the kind of capabilities that you gain, in a program like the furniture department, which was the point, right? So it wasn't that we imagined educating this kind of production line of furniture designers, although there are a lot of furniture designers who have come out of the program, but there are people doing so many varied things. And they all say that they couldn't have done those things without that particular education, but it's not necessarily making furniture anymore. It's using that way of thinking or that way of creating a brief for yourself, a design brief, sort of, or whatever the brief is, and then figuring out the steps to get to where you want to get with it. And that kind of skill is really well modeled in the process of designing and making furniture. But it could be sculpture, it could be fashion, it could be exhibition design, it could be teaching, it could be running a nonprofit or a community organization. There are so many ways that someone can manifest that skill set that all have meaning. And I think it's an interesting way, like when you go through accreditation in a school, there are these teams that come and they have a certain kind of set of competencies that they're looking in each program to see if those competencies are reached. And at one point, we were really pushing back against the accreditation organizations and saying these competencies are so limited compared to what actually students learn and produce. You need to open these up and just think about learning outcomes rather than competencies. It's not like you're trying to give people a list they can check off. I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. But look at the way that they can think and the things that they're creating that have never been created before and don't have a checklist. And it's very hard in an educational system. I mean, RISD's pretty good about that because it's about this whole creative environment that is about moving boundaries. But for a lot of people in their educational experience, it's not. And I think that for me, when I look at the results of the furniture department, I just look at the amazing careers that people have created coming out of there. And some of them are in areas that I, never would have expected, which is delightful. And there are enough furniture designers that I still think we can call it the furniture design department, enough lighting designers and textile and et cetera. But we thought at one point about changing the name and just thinking about something much more broad based. But I think that the evidence is in the graduates who are doing these incredible things. And some of your peers, I'm sure you keep up with them, are dealing with some of the same questions that you're talking about with establishing yourself as a manager, essentially, and developing communication confidence and the ability to, speak to different audiences and still be effective and still communicate clearly. Those are all professional skills that if you believe in your work enough, you'll develop by default because you want to do the work. And so it won't be as scary as if someone said to you, okay, you're going to be a public speaker now. That would be terrifying to anyone. But if someone says, well, you're going to talk about your work, it's a very different thing. So it's this notion of learning all of these kind of administrative and professional skills so that you can have your own career. which is, very different than working for someone else. Which, that's good too, but it involves different skills. But when you're running your own show, it really is you can apply the same things that you apply when you're designing a chair to the problem of running your business. But it takes a while to realize that.
Yeah, I think definitely for me, like looking back, the most important thing that I really gained from RISD was really more of like a feeling, like having like a passion or like a love for making, because you don't really have, anything else that drives you when you graduate. You don't have these assignments, so it's like, what are you trying to achieve? And it really, after graduation, it really stripped me down to think, okay, what do I need to be happy and to survive? And for me, that was really like a wood shop. I was like, I need to be in a wood shop again, otherwise I just don't feel right.
Yeah.
And I think that passion, that love for making is like what I try to keep central to whatever else I do. So if I'm teaching or like managing like a shop, as long as I create like an environment where everyone can also feel that love for making, then everything's going to go fine.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. I think for, speaking on personally, the scariest time in my entire life was right after I graduated, because I felt like I was supposed to be an instant success or, have an instant identity. And it took several years to establish my studio and feel like I could actually make the things I wanted to make. So that transition time is really hard, but when you get through it, anything's possible.
Of course, not too many years after Joyce graduated, I think it was in 2021, but it could have been in 2020, her exploded chair entered the permanent collection of RISD's museum, acquired by the curator Elizabeth Williams there. The first of multiple museums that have acquired Joyce's work. Joyce, when you were a student there, obviously, the museum is run in many ways separately from the college, as is tradition with these institutions that are blessed with both. Did you have the opportunity to actually, in addition to being in the wood shop, living in the wood shop with your professors and your colleagues, did you have a lot of opportunity to kind of look at works in storage, study furniture from the past? Did you spend a lot of hours in the museum?
Not that much. I mean, I would really say I was living in studio like all the time. But I mean, there were some earlier assignments where we had to go into the museum and, look at and sketch, furniture and like pick out something that we liked. And there was we did get a chance to see the storage. So I remember distinctly seeing like my first like Tom Dixon chair. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah. James, I think you're muted.
Oh, I didn't really have anything else to say.
Oh.
I was laughing at this. Tom Dixon is currently on view in a show up here, but his work is amazing.
There's at RISD, there's the museum, which people use differently. Some of them get really into other collections that aren't even necessarily the furniture in the decorative arts areas. But there's also a nature lab, which is like a museum of natural specimens. That's amazing. And there are always a number of students that sort of live in the nature lab. And the nature lab has a lot of digital equipment for, interesting microscopes and visualizations, things at multiple scales, from the kind of nanoscale to the cosmos. And so that's a really influential learning space, as well as the museum. They're kind of like two different escape places where you can really learn about either objects and fine and art, or art and nature.
Yeah, I was one of the monitors at the nature lab for a while before I got too busy in senior year, but I took care of like the aquatic, the tanks downstairs, testing the water and everything.
Do you think that affected your design sensibility at all, being in the nature lab?
Yeah, I think I mean, I was already like interested in the sciences, and I already loved animals, and I had like a fish in college. So I mean, for me, it was just more of like a personal thing. And I love Betsy and everyone that was working there.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely found it was like a good escape, and also just just being surrounded by like such a lush environment was just really fun. And I think later on, maybe it also influenced me to intern at the Natural History Museum in New York City. So I was surrounded by more specimens, which I really enjoyed.
I was just going to ask you, Joyce, did you do any field work with your geology program at Brown? Were you out doing, experiments in the natural world in addition to spending all your time in the studio?
Yeah, that's a key part of the geology curriculum, and like part of the reason why I joined the department. Like I didn't know anything about geology, going in. I just wanted like a science background, maybe engineering, but that wasn't right for me. But yes, like geology, I think I joined it for a lot. I think similar reasons for why I joined furniture design department is that it's this idea of knowledge through experience. So you really have to be out there looking at the outcrops, looking at the layers to really get like a full sense of what you're actually looking at, because you're stretching your mind in terms of time and scale. You have to look at a rock and be like, okay, this was this formed like 4 billion years ago. Cambrian to Precambrian, etc. And it really stretches your imagination. So you really have to be there to fully grasp it. So they have like a fall field trip, a spring field trip, and I think the best week of my education was really the spring break field trip where we went to Iceland and spent a week there.
Amazing. And
Go ahead, Rosanne.
Oh no, I was just wondering, do you think about the kind of formal nature of what you learned in geology when you're in your sketchbook? Do you see them as distinctly influential to the kind of work that you're developing in your sketchbook?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think geology should be just required for everyone, because it really is like no one knows like where they are until you really get the full picture, the full story of everything. So it really breaks down what you understand about structure and material and how everything is really interconnected. Everything's just like in a flow state from one state to another. Everything's like just a moment, like a little snapshot in time. So I think about that a lot when I'm making my work, like the intersections between like the sort of the limbo spaces between creation and destruction, like areas where something is in this primordial state of transformation. I think is really what inspires me, both like why I'm interested in geology and furniture design.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I definitely see that in your work, but I don't know if I didn't know that about you, if I would have that awareness. But I think your work really reflects that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think everyone has maybe like these like core inner interests that don't necessarily have to be super overt on the surface, but something that it's always in the back of your mind.
Yeah, and I think, when you get to a certain place in your life, it's also, you kind of know how you draw from influences. And so like at the stage where I am now, I'm thinking about what environments do I like to be in? And I just spend a lot of time in those environments. So they inevitably, turn up in my work, like that table that you showed, James. I spend a lot of time around water because I'm really drawn to it. And so that piece in the Milwaukee and LACMA show was very literal because it had digitally printed water on, veneer. And the work that I'm doing now for my show is using water, but in a slightly more abstracted way, but it still allows me to spend time where I love to be and then bring that kind of fascination back into the work. And so it sounds like a similar process, Joyce, that you're doing with your field studies. And then whether or not they're literally geological, they still carry that sensibility or that way of observing and perceiving that comes into your objects.
Yeah, I think the nature of inspiration for artists is really interesting, and like something that I've been thinking about a lot more lately is like I think all artists have like two people in like that they have to hold in themselves, like the sort of the conscious executive mind, the problem solver, like the designer, and then the whatever's on the inside, no idea what it is, like whatever drives them to make work, and like kind of where this inspiration goes and you don't know what happens. So I guess I'm wondering, like, so do you feel like your work continues to like surprise you?
Absolutely. I mean, the difference now is that I don't feel like I'm trying to necessarily prove anything anymore. So I'm just making things that I'm interested in seeing and that I'm interested in, like ideas just kind of come together. I think partly because being an administrator for so long and running a complex organization that was a college and a museum, I, uh, so much of it was about thinking about the audiences and the students and, you know, it did really feel like a kind of service. And now I think that I have the opportunity to just make things. I just make things that I'm curious to see or that are, you know, bring pleasure into the studio experience. So I don't feel this great pressure that I felt in other, you know, when I had solo shows at a much earlier point in my career, it was like terrifying. And now I don't really think about it in those terms. I just think about it as, you know, as you get older, the clock isn't forever. And I, you know, it's, so what do I want to see now come out of my studio? And it's really a kind of relaxed and pleasurable way to make.
Roseanne, you've mentioned just a couple of times in the last couple of minutes the new work in the show. I don't think we actually gave the audience any details. Would you like to share with us where and when and the whys, and when is that coming up?
Yeah, so I'm going to have a show in November, open in November in Gallery Naga in Boston. And it's a whole new, I'm making all new work for it, which has been really fun. And I'm making fabric for the first time, so that's really new. And when I went to RISD as a student, I applied as a photographer. And I've always taken pictures, but I've never seen myself as a photographer. And I've started being a little more serious about that and then bringing the two together in the work. So some of the work includes photographic images like the piece in Milwaukee, but as I said, they're a little more abstracted now. And the fabric is also from photographs that I've taken. And I'm just enjoying sort of blurring the lines and using both media as a language, a form language or a compositional language, and just seeing what happens. So it's been really, really fun, and using a lot of materials that I haven't used in the past. So, but it's still, you know, when I look at a lot of the work that's happening now, you know, my work is of a time and I hope it's evolving, but it's definitely so much about, you know, fine making and things that aren't necessarily as relevant now, but it's who I am. And so, I mean, Joyce is, I would put in that category, but not all young makers, you know, have that care, that concern, and that's fine. I don't think that's not a value judgment, but it's something that my work is, that's expected in my work. So it's very tedious. And it's actually fun because I've sold a couple photographs now, and it's just, wow, it's so much easier than, I mean, it's not easier necessarily to take a photograph or to make an image, but it a lot less time to print than making a piece of furniture. So it's kind of nice, you know, to discover that at this point in my life.
Joyce, what about you? I mean, obviously, we're very pleased as a gallery to report that that the show has been selling like crazy, and so it's exciting because you're going to be really busy over the next, you know, year or so, making additions and commissions that have come out of the show for both private collectors as well as institutions. But going past that stage, is there a big something that you're thinking about that you want to do in the next couple of years? Is, you know, obviously this is your first solo show. You've got the day job going on in Houston right now. Is there something with teaching? Is there something with you know, a new material? Is there what's next for you over the next couple of years, you think?
I mean, it's a really big question. I feel like every time I set a goal for myself, it doesn't, like, you know, I'm really cautious of saying I'm going to do this next, because usually like it's something else drives me to do something else. So I kind of try to live in the moment as an artist. But I mean, obviously there's like more personal goals for myself, which, I mean, for me, like, it's just being able to get out there more, like form more relationships with other makers, maybe like teach more interesting classes and not just like basic intro woodworking over and over again. And just, exposing myself to more makers out there, because I think, for me, my studio practice is very private, very, solitude, although I am supported by just so many people, family, friends. I have a big network. But I'm thinking of being able to figure out how to open up more.
Would that mean perhaps like exploring like residency options and things like that?
Yeah, I would like to do a little bit more traveling, more residencies, more other types of opportunities.
Very nice. Well, for our audience out there, if this is your last call, if you have any questions, just post them right away. But otherwise, I think we're just about out of time. Any final thoughts here?
I just, when you asked the question to Joyce about what she plans doing in the future, and then you said, this is your first solo show, and it just struck me that it's such an accomplished show that, I don't think you need any more pressure on yourself than I'm sure you're already placing personally. But I just can't wait to see, the next show and the next show. And I just want to really say that you deserve to have this incredibly successful show. And I can't wait to see where you go next.
And at the gallery, I second that. Joyce, it is such a pleasure working with you. We have had such good times over the last month already in some of the live events that we've had with you. Whether it's involving the show in Montreal or during TFAP here. I don't even know if you're really aware of this, but Joyce will certainly be part of the next edition of our Objects USA Triennale series. We featured her in our Objects USA 2020 exhibition and publication, which was overseen by Glenn Adamson. And we are going to be doing that again at the gallery in late 2024. A survey again of 50 to 60 contemporary makers from the United States today. So Joyce will certainly be in that, and there'll be something I'm sure really incredible there as well. I thank you so much, Rosanne, for shedding so much wisdom, and I really appreciate your time. And to our audience, thank you so much for attending. And you'll get an email from us later once it goes on to our archives on YouTube as well. And again, if anyone wants a copy of Joyce's exhibition catalog and hasn't received it, please reach out to the gallery or to me, and we'll be sure to mail you one. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.